Good morning and good day, everyone. Are you ready to learn? If yes, let us now start. So today, we will talk about the Module 8 Neo-Behaviorism by Tolman and Bandura. So, here are our learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, the students will be able to understand the Neo-Behaviorism by Tolman and Bandura, explain the Tolman's purposive behaviorism and Bandura's social learning theory, construct plan that shows the application of the three key concepts of Albert Bandura's social learning theory in teaching. So, let us now look of what is the meaning of neo-behaviorism. So, according to the module, neo-behaviorism is the behavior that cannot be fully understood simply in terms of observable stimuli and reactions. Neo-behaviorism introduced mediating variables into the behaviorist stimulus response scheme. So, neo-behaviorism is when an individual begins to respond with a trial and error, no? But later on, the response becomes more internally driven, or there is a cognitive perspective. So, based on the definition, we have behavioristic and we have cognitive perspective. So, meaning the individual, when they begins to respond to any stimulus, it will develop a behavior to the students, ano? So, now, in the neo-behaviorism theory, there are two famous theories that proposed and studied about neo-behaviorism. So, what are they? So, we have Tolman and the other one is Bandura. So, before I will introduce them to you, let me just have a general view of the two theories under neo-behaviorism. So, as we can see here, in Tolman, it is called purposive behaviorism, and in Bandura, it is called social learning theory. Now, in Tolman's, there are four important terms that we have to remember or we have to understand. So, we have goal-directedness, cognitive maps, latent learning, and intervening variables. So, while in Bandura, we have three concepts that it is about principles, modeling, and the four conditions for effective modeling. So, now, let me introduce to you who is Edward C. Tolman. So, he is an American psychologist and he is known for behavioral psychology, cognitive map, latent learning, and purposive behavior. So, he was a professor of psychology at University of California, and he was born on April 4, 1864 at Massachusetts, United States. Now, in Edward Tolman, we will find that one of his contributions not only in psychology but of course being used in education is the so-called sign learning. So, what is the sign learning? So, sign learning is also synonymous to SR theory. So, that implies that organism got along fat by internal and external stimuli. So, internal stimuli is within himself. His motivation, his passion, his goals or dreams. So, while the external stimuli are the stimuli that the teacher will do to encourage and to motivate the students to perform in the class. So, organisms learns correct movement sequences so that they are released under appropriate conditions of drive environmental stimulation. So, individuals have a capacity to learn sequences but not just consequences, correct consequences when they are released to appropriate conditions. So now, when there's a good environment and when the teacher is possessing that kind of effectiveness or efficiency to drive the organisms or the learner do something good in the class, it learns the signs. The signs can be cues. The signs can be any stimulus that tell where it is and where can we find reward. There are many signs that we can find inside the classroom, and these signs called sign learning. So for example, the grades, it can be an example of reward. Then the prizes are also example of rewards. Something it called stimulus or the SS theory rather than stimulus response theory. So we find that according to Tolman that the sign learning theory is more on SS theory or stimulus rather than the SR theory. Now there are of course alternatives given by Tolman in his experiment. The learner is following signs to a goal, so the signs can be a path, the signs can be a steps to follow to achieve a certain goal, no? So learning way about following a sort of map. So there's the introduction of a kind of map by the experiment of Tolman, and we will learning it as we go on, no? So learning not movements but meanings. So before behavior is learned by the students, they must of course know the meaning of what they are doing, so that the behavior will be reflected of them. So organisms learns a behavior route or way, not a movement pattern. So these are now the important principles that sign learning will follow, or these are the important principles that are satisfied by Tolman in his sign learning. So let us now focus on cognitive maps. Of course, it is a construct introduced by Tolman, and according to him, the cognitive maps is a mental representation of the layout of one's environment. Now, mental representation, what is in the mind of the students, it is called cognitive maps, and before the behavior is developed, before it become an overt behavior and be seen by everybody, it is start with cognitive map. His example of an experiment is his maze, an example of mental representation. And this is an example of the map, and this is called Tolman's maze. So in this Tolman's maze, you will find that there are of course at the starting point where the rat will be placed, and the rat will go on until he finds the feedbacks, and the feedback of course will be the reward that the rat will receive upon going the route to the correct route or way. When this is experienced by the rat, the maze will become the cognitive map that Tolman is saying. So now these are the following key concepts in the experiment of Tolman. So number 1 is always purposive and goal directed. So there are two important elements before learning a course. It must be proposing. There must have a purpose. So if you are going to ask any student in the school or in your classroom, why are you here? Of course, they will say they want to learn. Other will say they want to achieve their dreams. Those are example of purposive and of course goal directed, no? So what are the goals of your students? Let's say after graduating, their goal is to pass the licensure examination, and after passing the exam, you want to become a teacher. It simply says that learning is always purposive and have direction, because without purpose and without goal, there will be no learning. Now, the example of this experiment is we find that the group of rats was placed at random in a maze, but food is always in the same location. In the experiment of Tolman's, we will find that he has made the two control groups. One group is placed in the maze, where in the food is placed in the same location, and another group which there are also maze, but the food is placed in different location. In this experiment, we will find that the purpose is to find the easiest way to find the food. And of course, it will serve as the goal to satisfy the stomach of the rat. And according to this experiment, the findings of Tolman, the food in the same location is better than the other group, no? So the organisms will select the shortest or the easiest path to achieve the goal. So next is the latent learning. So what is latent learning? It remains or stay with the individual until needed. The learnings that is not manifested at once. There are many times in the school that we won't find the outcome until about some time, because there are so many things that we desire from our students that we want to see at once, but this incident will not always happen. There are many times that the students learn, and their learning will appear in the near future, not inside the class, but maybe it will appear after a year or after when the circumstances requires. So that is called latent learning. So learning that we have that are not yet seen in our behavior, or that are not visible in all our activities, but this time will come that it will appear as it is needed, ano? So next we have another concept of Tolman. It is intervening variable learning is mediated by expectations, perceptions, representation, needs, and other interval or environmental variables. So we will find the different kind of variables for learning. So we have expectations. So example of expectations of himself, expectation of the teacher, expectations of the parents. So we have perceptions, whatever last things that the learner perceive from classroom or perceive from the teacher's methodology. That's an example, no? So, and of course, we have another key concept, and Tolman concluded that it is not needed. Also, it provides an incentive for performance. In the view of Tolman, in his Neo-Behaviorism theory, to reinforce is not an important factor, although reinforcement will help as an incentive for performance. That what he concluded in his experiment. Now let us move on from Tolman's purposive behaviorism. And now let us proceed to Bandura's social learning theory. So first, let me introduce to you who is Bandura. So Albert Bandura is a Canadian-American psychologist, a David Starr Jordan Professor in Emeritus of Social Science and Psychology at Stanford University. Born in December 4, 1925, and known for his social cognitive theory, self-efficacy, social learning theory, Baudel experiment, agency, and reciprocal determinism. So, now the social learning theory by Bandura has the following principles. So, number 1, people can learn by observing. So, through the eyes, as you observe as an individual, observes what is happening in his surroundings. So, you can learn something from it. So, number 2, learning cannot occur without a change in behavior. So, this is something like latent learning by Tolman. But we will find if they define it synonymously that there are learning if it is not seen in their behavior. So, third, cognition plays a role in learning. It was said by many scholars that cognition is the base foundation of psychomotor, as well of affective domain. Without cognition, nothing will be learned by affective as well as by psychomotor domains. So last, social learning theory can be considered a bridge or a transition between behaviorist theory and cognitive learning theories. So because in his theory, Bandura said that there will be no behavioral change unless there is a cognitive input. So now there are four important factors in social learning by observational learning. So first, there's a need of attention. It is paying attention to the model is a condition for learning. So before a student learns something, he must pay an attention. He must look at the model. So if the model is the teacher or if the model is his fellow students, he must give attention to that model. So another important factor is social learning is retention. Remembering what the model did is a condition for imitating the model's behavior. So even if he is already in the home, he will still remember, or he can still remember the model if the model is the teacher or if it is his fellow students. There is a need of retention or must have that ability to maintain his cognition. So, what he has seen as acted or as said by the model should be remembered. And the third one is reproduction. People must have the capacity for imitating the behavior, usually if it is as terms of psychology, when a model is teaching the different steps in a dance. So the student is not only required to give his attention to retain it, but of course he is one way another after practicing. He must reproduce the same steps, if not the same extent, at the least he must reproduce the basic steps, even without the grace of like the model. And of course, the fourth important factor in social learning is the motivation. People must be motivated to imitate the behavior. So, according to Bandura, this is now the triad that determines human behavior. So, according to him, the behavior of an individual is learned or is determined by three important factors. So, the first one is the cognitive factor. So, we can include a personal factor, or the learner is knowledge, his expectations, and attitude. So, the knowledge, of course, is what he has already learned, and it is very important that the model or the teacher has already learned by the students before he will continue to give a new learning or go the learner. Then the expectation of the learner, and of course his attitude. So he must develop, of course, a good study habits, and when the model of the teacher is on front and discussing a lesson, he must really listen and give his attention. It is very important so that behavior is changed. So we have also environmental factor. So example of that is we have social norms to character of the teacher. So it is one example of this, and of course his classmate as well as his parents, as well as it is an example of social norms. Then Sa access in community, it includes the facility. Let's say for example, the library or the different supplies of equipment that is needed for experiment is an example of access in a community, no? So, and of course, the influence on others is the ability to change on environment, especially at this point in time that we are using another platform in teaching, in the learning process, and the accessibility of media and the accessibility of the internet connections. They are the example of environmental factors. So, then we have of course the behavioral factors. Another important factor in determining human behavior. We have the skills of the students or the learner, of course. The skills of the learners differs from the level that he is in. So, for example, preschool learners have different skills as compared to elementary, as compared to high school and senior high. Then, practice is another behavioral factor. And the frequent the practice is, of course, the more the behavior will be over or will be seen in the student for self-efficacy or how student master the behavior that he has already acquired from the model. Now, let us look on the environment reinforces model. So, number 1 is the observer is reinforced by a model. Number 2, the observer is reinforced by a third person. Number 3, imitated behavior itself leads to reinforcing consequences. And number 4, consequences of the model's behavior affect the observer's behavior vicariously. So, what is vicarious reinforcement? So where the model is enforcing for response, and then the observer shows an increase in the same response. Although we believe that no students will be overpower his teacher, you know, but there will be times that when an observer is good or better than the model, he will of course shows an increase in the same response. So let's say for example, a teacher is not good in dancing, but there's a student that is good in dancing. When the teacher demonstrates steps, and then there will be students that very good in dancing, he or she will exhibit it vicariously better than the teacher. So next, in regarding the consequences, if the model behavior affect service level vicariously, this principle was formulated by Bandura because of his experiment about Bobodal, and in his experiment he has shown a karate expert hitting the dal, and after the observers have watched about the karate expert hitting the dal, the model was praised by the observers, and the observers did the same or did what the karate expert had done to the dal, ano? So, and now last is the educational implication. So, number 1, student learn by observing a role model. And number 2, describing the consequences of behavior can effectively increase the appropriate behaviors and decrease inappropriate ones. And number 3, modeling provides an alternative to shaping for teaching new behaviors. And number 4, teachers and parents must model appropriate behaviors. And number 5, teachers should expose students to variety models. So that's all for today's discussion, and I hope that you all learned a lot from this video lecturing. And after learning, you are now assigned to answer the following activity.